Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Our show tonight brought to you by Nature Box. Order great tasting and healthy snacks and get them delivered right to your door. Forget the vending machine, the candy bars, and the sugar overload with so many other snack foods. Instead, enjoy delicious treats, stuff like cinnamon swirled kettle kernels and more. Support this show. You get 50% off your first order. Go to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. That's naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. Had a great time this last weekend with 6 tour stops in 3 days in North Carolina. It was a whirlwind. I was totally fried when I got off the plane, but we just had a ball. Thanks to everybody who came out. I discovered a little nook in Greensboro, North Carolina that I fell in love with. And I wish we had one here in my town. It's called Geeksboro Coffee House Cinema, and it's where we had our tour stop. And I'm thinking, oh, it's a coffee house? All right, well, that'll be different. And so we show up, and the upper floor is a little coffee place, just like you'd see somewhere else. Kind of a, it's a little cooler than a Starbucks. But there's this stairway that goes down into this dark basement area, and it's a small cinema. And I don't know how many it seats down there. Is it 50 maybe? It's really intimate. Black curtains everywhere, a single screen, not a big screen, and you're right up on top of it, man. And they show just awesome stuff. They show like the old Godzilla's Inframan, the 1975 classic. They have like a big night where they show Inframan. Tomorrow night, they're showing Gamera 2, Attack of Legion. How I wish I was in Greensboro for that. By the way, if you don't know who Gamera is, it's a giant turtle monster that flies around and it spins and it saves Earth from danger. You have to see it, okay? It's a classic. If you like the old Toho Godzilla films, that's kind of what we're talking about. They've got the guy who created the Toxic Avenger hosting some deal coming up. They show a bunch of MST 3000 and Rift Track stuff there. I mean, it's just awesome. How come we don't have one of those here? So anyway, if you ever go through, you ought to stop into that little place. I just fell in love with it. And I lamented the fact that I didn't get a chance to actually participate in one of these sort of geek out sessions over these sci-fi classic films. I love MST 3000. Haven't watched a lot of Rift Tracks, but everybody says it's really good. And I guess they get to do newer films on that as well. Anyway, coming up on the podcast roster in the next several weeks, starting next Tuesday night, we're starting a 2-part series on counter-apologetics. And I've got next week, Tracy Harris, Matt Dillahunty, and Aaron Rod joining me. And we're going to sort of talk amongst ourselves about some of the biggest and most common arguments from the apologists, some of the tricks of the trade to deal with, fact over fiction and how to have conversations along these lines. And then there's a second part. And that's going to be exclusively dedicated to our listener calls and emails. As soon as we kick off the show, that's it. We're going to go right to the listeners, and the whole show on part 2 is going to be dedicated to you. So if you have a question about a certain argument that you've heard, you don't understand, you want to know more of, maybe you've got a great presentation, refutation, whatever you'd like to share with the audience, you can send those in via email, podcast@thethinkingatheist.com. And we'll have the whole crew back. And I think JT Eberhard may join us for the second week as well. Following that, I've got the psychology of religious belief coming up in July. We're going to talk to Dr. Caleb Lack, among others. And I may come to regret this, but I'm thinking about doing a podcast called The Suggestion Box, where people who listen to the show and say, I wish Seth would fix this, or I wish he would change that, or add or subtract this about the show. I will open the floodgates, and you can call or email and tell me what you would like to suggest. I haven't scheduled it yet because, honestly, I'm terrified. But it might be interesting. It might be kind of also a way to kind of mix it up. We've sort of hit so many different subjects lately. It'd be nice to open the floodgates for you guys so you can tell me, what do you think? What can I be doing to make the show better for the listening audience? And I really do want to make sure that the podcast is optimized, and it is. I'm not going to be able to please everybody. You're not going to please everybody, especially with an audience of free thinkers. But I think it'd be stupid to be so isolated that I wasn't allowing input to come in from people who might have a good idea. Okay, podcast at thethinkingatheist.com, and please be gentle. And that show will be coming up, I think, sometime in July. Before I get to the content of our show and my very special guest, a quick word about our sponsor, NatureBox, the place you go to snack happy. And if you've been listening to this show lately, you know I'm not only thankful for NatureBox as a sponsor, but I'm really a fan of what they're about and what they do. And fans of this show are fans of what they do. It's been awesome. People sending me pictures of their own NatureBox orders when they arrive. Hey, we got them. They're awesome. Here's a photograph. We dig this stuff. That's terrific. With NatureBox, you can customize the box of snacks specifically to what you want. They have a checkbox there, and you can say gluten-free. Cool, we can do that. Milk-free, soy-free, sugar-free. You can check those as well. Do you like sweet? You like spicy? You like sweet and spicy? Whatever. Streamline your preferences and choose delicious snacks like coffee kettle popcorn, French toast granola, pumpkin cranberry crave, Big Island pineapple, honey, macadamia pretzel pops, cocoa waffle wafers, over 100 different snacks to choose from. 0 trans fats, 0 high fructose corn syrup, nothing artificial, and free shipping anywhere in the U.S. They now ship to Canada as well, and you can get a $10 credit if you refer a friend. Snack happy, snack healthy. Support this show and get half off your first box. 50% off at naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. That's naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. Dr. Carolyn Porco is an American planetary scientist. She is known for her work on the Voyager missions to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune in the 80s. She leads the imaging scientist team on the Cassini mission, currently in orbit around Saturn. She's also involved with the New Horizons mission launched to Pluto. She has authored more than 115 scientific papers. She's given popular TED Talks lectures. She's won many awards, including the Carl Sagan Medal, presented by the American Astronomical Society for excellence in the communication of science to the public. She was named one of the 25 most influential people in space by Time magazine in 2012, and she was recently elected to be a laureate of the International Academy of Humanism. Finally, check this out. She was a character consultant on the motion picture Contact and the 2009 reboot of Star Trek, directed by J.J. Abrams. I'm privileged to have her on the podcast tonight, Dr. Carolyn Porco. Thanks so much for joining the show. Great to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Seth.
Let's talk about you for a second. You are the product of a science-heavy home, mom and dad in the field of science. When did that spark sort of ignite in you?
Boy, no, not a science-heavy home at all. I was expected to have 5 kids, get married, and be living back in the Bronx. No, I don't know where I got it from, really. I think I just had an innate curiosity, and I thankfully was in a good school system. I was in the New York public school system, which back in those days was actually pretty good. And I had good teachers who encouraged me. So that, together with the fact that I grew up in the 60s, which I'm sorry, but I do think it was like the best decade ever. There was so much going on there. And, it was a very spacey decade. Kennedy said in 1961 or 62, I forget, we're going to the moon. And boy, did that blow the doors off everything. Everybody was pushing the limits, and we were going to go to space. And so I got swept up in all that. And it was the decade of Star Trek, and we landed on the moon in 1969. So, I think all that set me on the course that I eventually followed.
Were you a spectator to that? Were you sitting in front of the television set with the rest of the world?
Oh, you talking about the moon landing?
I'm talking about Neil Armstrong's giant leap for mankind.
Of course I was. Are you kidding? That's where everybody was. In fact, there were so many people watching the television that the crime rate went down, I think, during that period of time. Or I might be mixing it up with the appearance of the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. Anyway, they both garnered a lot of attention, and I was there, and it actually was a very interesting moment. My father was not a very emotional man at all. But when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon and said, "The Eagle has landed," he actually cried. So I'm telling everybody who was not there, it was a moment that I don't think is possible these days because our attention is so diverted everywhere and we've kind of got jaded about it. Maybe when people land on Mars, it'll be equivalent. But it was a gigantic moment.
I remember reading a book, I think it was Timeline by Michael Crichton, where he was in the first chapter talking about how we live in a generation that's sent spacecraft to the moon and had an amazing shuttle program or what have you, and then we sort of lost interest. I mean, it just boggles the mind that something so amazing should become so sort of passé with millions of people who are busy, distracted, and doing other things.
Oh, I see that as part of a bigger cultural, I don't want to say shift because I don't want to think that it's really a major direction change. I just hope it's a glitch. But, a lot of things that are so noble that it seems anyway older generations regarded as noble and worthy of pursuit are no longer. I mean, things like character and integrity and things that we used to hold up as being really important and laudable and to be emulated. And we don't do that anymore. Now it's all, how much money you make. And I guess just capitalism has just taken over. So, there's no immediate profit really to be made in space. We do it for the love of knowledge, and we do it for a very long-term vision of our future. But, we're getting very sidetracked with a lot of other problems. And there are genuine problems that need to be solved, but I really do think we could still have a robust scientific solar system exploration program at the same time. We're just obviously not doing it as robustly as some of us would like.
Well, you speak to a question that was actually presented by one of our listeners who said, why are we risking human lives? Why are we spending billions upon billions of dollars? Why are we reaching outward when we have so many problems right here in front of our face? Isn't all of this a tremendous waste of time, energy, and resources that we should be using on the poor and that type of thing? How would you respond to that question?
I have there's a two-pronged answer to this. First, I could virtually guarantee you could entirely shut off the whole scientific enterprise. There is no guarantee at all it would go to solving any problems at all. The way the budget works in Washington, it's so partitioned, into different areas that just because you completely close off one program, you shut it down completely, doesn't mean that money gets distributed. That's the practical answer. Then there's another practical answer, and that is if you really thought about it and you compared numbers and looked at how much the NASA budget is compared to the other things we spend money on, it's trivial. It is 0.5%. You could double it, make it 1%, no one would notice. So, it's a really quite efficient process, and there's a lot to be gained for that tiny little amount of money.
I don't want to spend too much time on the budget thing, but, NASA has been a hot topic in the halls of government, funding NASA. Tell me about what the climate is like over there.
Well, it ebbs and flows depending on who's in Congress and, how they're feeling and what disposition they have towards space exploration. And, the government cycle, every 8 years, things change. The problem, and I think it's a huge problem, is that, at least I'm getting whiplash watching NASA ping-pong back and forth every time there's a new change of administration. So in some sense, and this has been the bane of NASA's existence ever since it was formed, NASA gets shoved around depending on which way the political winds blow, and yet we're dealing now with projects, especially now that we've done all the really easy stuff, we're dealing now with projects that are many years long. Cassini took 14 years before we got to Saturn. How many presidential administrations is that, And then we've been in orbit now for 10 years in a couple weeks. And, if you don't have a sustained interest and sustained financial support, then it becomes a really dicey thing. So I don't think that's going to change, however. I don't know what to do to change that, except maybe, instead of having a democracy, have a monarchy where you have a king, a benign king or queen, who stays there like Queen Elizabeth for 60 years, and she's always a fan of the space program. Yeah. So I don't know what to say to your question, really. It's anybody's guess. I would say it's going to be more of the same. It's always going to be a fight. And it makes me sad to think it's always going to be a fight, but I think that's the name of the game.
We'll come back to Cassini. Let's talk Voyager. You were involved with the Voyager program in what way?
I was like the luckiest person on the planet to be added to the Voyager mission right out of graduate school. I worked with someone who was a Voyager imaging team member, and I did my thesis on two very nice topics in Saturn's rings, and one of them happened to be completely relevant to what we were going to study in orbit around Uranus. The same type of rings that we find around Uranus, I studied at Saturn. Okay, very narrow rings. So the imaging team leader at the time, Brad Smith, this is on the Voyager mission, added me to the team, and I became a team member, and I helped plan the Uranus encounter. And then by the time we got to Neptune, I in fact was leading the small group of people who were planning the observations for the ring system at Neptune. So it was just great. Cassini has been magnificent. It's been a decade of the most incredible scientific exploration you could imagine. We have learned so much about a whole enormous breadth of scientific disciplines, and we've also come to really deep understanding because we've been there for 10 years and could study things over and over again and really take closer looks. But I have to say there was a romance about Voyager that we really don't have on Cassini. It was really like an odyssey. It was many years in between planets and then a very brief period of time of intense exploration and this feeling of conquest. And then after the flyby of whatever planet it was over, it was back in the boats, oars in the water, and, years until the next port of call. And we knew at the time we were making history. We hadn't seen the outer solar system really in the detail that we saw with Voyager. We hadn't seen it before. And of course, it was my first professional assignment. So I have to say that was a defining experience for me, and I will always treasure my time on Voyager.
Correct my information if I have it wrong, but I have August 25th, 2012 as the date that Voyager 1 became the first human-made object to enter interstellar space, traveling further than anyone or anything in history. Are we still getting data from Voyager 1?
Oh, yes, both of them. Now, we're not taking images. We ceased taking images a very long time ago because there's nothing to take images of. The cameras were, of course, designed to see things up close, and there's nothing out there. But the instruments that can measure magnetic fields and measure plasma and so on, they're still taking data, and that's how we know that we passed out of the sun's bubble, magnetic bubble, and, entered what you might call interstellar space. It's incorrect to say we've escaped the sun because that's not really what's happened. It's more that we've entered the realm where the sun's magnetic influence has ceased to be important. And it was a wonderful feeling to know that because of that event, Voyager's escaping the magnetic influence of the sun, that we were kind of like on the road to eternity, right? We're now wandering the space in between the stars. And it's just fabulous to know that I had something to do with that mission. And we all kind of are on it, It's carrying all of us.
How is that information transmitted back to us? If it's so far out there, how do we get the data?
Well, it's the same way we got the data when it was flying by Jupiter or Saturn. It's a signal, an electromagnetic signal. There's a carrier frequency, and then we alter certain aspects of the wave. Either it's amplitude modulation or frequency modulation, and those perturbations to the carrier signal are really the data that is sent down. It's, the way it's encoded. It's now, instead of 40 minutes, an hour and a half, or even 4 hours light travel time at Neptune, it's now 16 hours and 17 hours. But nonetheless, we've got time to wait, and we're still listening to them.
Cassini is an unmanned spacecraft sent to Saturn. Can you sort of give me our audience a primer on the Cassini project, what it is, when it started, and what it's doing?
Okay, so we were thinking about missions that would go to the outer planets next, even as the Voyager mission was going on. Okay, Galileo was the mission that was conceived to go to Jupiter, and then came time for people, our community, to think about what are we going to do next at Saturn. Saturn, of course, is the richest planetary system in terms of phenomenology. It's got everything you could ask for. You know, it's got a gaseous planet with very complicated meteorology. It has a major magnetic field and a whole magnetosphere of charged particles and all the kind of plasma phenomena that you find in such a system. It's got the granddaddy of planetary rings. Everything we see around Jupiter or Uranus or Neptune, those ring systems we find embedded in the rings of Saturn and more. And it's got an enormous satellite system, very diverse. Each body looks different than the next. And amidst all those moons, we have Titan, which is Saturn's largest moon. It's the only moon that has a substantial atmosphere. And in many respects, it's kind of equivalent to the Earth, which is why it's so fascinating to study. And it's got my favorite, which is the little moon Enceladus, which we now know has a habitable zone under its south polar region. And we are dying, some of us are dying to go back with the proper instrumentation to check to see if there is life there. So it has been, Cassini has been in orbit, orbiting through this incredibly rich planetary system, kind of quietly observing all these years, and we are growing more knowledgeable and wiser for it.
This type of stuff requires so much precision. One tiny thing goes wrong. One piece of code is entered incorrectly. One mechanical malfunction happens, and if it's not game over, you're seriously crippled.
Well, this is why it took us 7 years to develop the spacecraft and the instruments before we launched them. We have to put in redundancy where we have the resources to do it. There's redundancy, so if one system fails, we, bring online another. These are redundant systems on the spacecraft. We don't always have the capability to do that. We can't duplicate everything on the spacecraft, but where we can, we do. And, we're in communication with the spacecraft. We can upload different software, make software patches, just like you do on an operating system here on the ground. And it is complex. It's been enormously complex to plan all this. I mean, we have to plan I don't even know myself what it is these days, but it's probably every 15 minutes of the mission. We planned ahead of time. It's taken years to plan all this. So it is very complicated, and yeah, I'm glad you appreciate how challenging it is. It's been an enormous success, so it means we did a good job.
You think we're going to find life? Do we have any protocols in place, any plans to attempt to find life on one of the moons or elsewhere?
Well, Cassini can't do that. Enceladus presents absolutely the best possibility for doing it because we know that it's geysers, and in fact, I've just submitted 2 papers. They've been accepted, and so they should be published, I'm guessing, within about a month or 2, that are going to report about 100 geysers coming from the southern polar region on Enceladus, and these we know now erupt, or they're sourced in a body of liquid, of an ocean, underneath the south polar terrain that is salty, so it tells us it's in contact with rocks, with a rocky core, or very likely, and it has organic materials. And so it's got everything that you would ask a habitable zone to have. So it's not out of the question that this body of water has, if not life itself, it's got prebiotic chemistry going on in it, and it is gushing out through vents into the space above the south polar region of Enceladus, and it's there for the taking. All we have to do is send a spacecraft back that is properly equipped to scoop up the material and measure its composition, certain aspects of its composition that could tell us if there's anything biologically interesting in that ocean. And so a number of us are planning missions as we speak. We're designing them, trying to figure out what's the best way to do it. We'd love to send a sample return there, send a spacecraft there with a component that would capture the icy particles in these geysers and actually come back to Earth. And that would be 7 years out, 7 years back. So we are planning some crazy-sounding ideas, but it's really important because NASA has said for decades now, we want to follow the water. We want to search for life. We want to know if life has arisen anywhere else in our solar system, and we now have the means to do it. We've found the solar system bodies that are the most promising for asking and answering that question, and we are now hoping to go back. So Cassini wasn't equipped originally to answer the question about life. We didn't know we'd find what we have found on Enceladus. At least we weren't sure. And so now that we know, we have to send an instrument back there that can ask and answer that question for us. So are we thinking about life in the solar system? You bet.
Is there a place online for our listeners to find some of the Cassini photographs?
Oh, yes, there is. I have a website that was specifically set up for posting all our publicly released images and more. I have lots of other things there. The website is cyclops.org, and it's spelled CICLOPS.org. And there are pictures there. You have to go on the left-hand column, and you'll find Imaging Diary, and you'll be able to find where we post all our pictures. We do them chronologically. We also have a page there, a site, a sub-site, if you will, where I post artists' work, the work of space artists. And if people want to contribute, I'd love to highlight your work. And what else? We have movies there. I've got a golf game, a flash-based golf game. People can golf on the moons of Saturn. So that is kind of the central place for the imaging team to put its pictures. So check it out.
Coming up next month on the 19th of July, it'll be the one-year anniversary of something called The Day the Earth Smiled. Tell me this story, if you would.
Back in Voyager days, I had the privilege of coming to know Carl Sagan, and I worked with him and others on planning and executing what is now the very famous pale blue dot image of Earth that was taken by the Voyager 1 spacecraft, the same spacecraft that just left the solar system, and it was out beyond the orbit of Neptune, high above the plane of the solar system, and it looked back to take a picture of the Earth. And that picture so much has been said about it. Carl Sagan wrote so beautifully about it. And it really was what he had to say about that image that has made the phrase pale blue dot ever since synonymous with a call to planetary brotherhood and a call to protection of the planet and the environment. Well, ever since I began my tenure as the leader of the imaging team on Cassini, I have had in my mind to do that picture over again, only make it better. And so finally, after years and years of being extraordinarily busy on Cassini, I found the time to go through the planned trajectory for the Cassini spacecraft. I started this, I'm guessing now, is about 4 years ago, and found a time that we could look back and take a picture of the Earth in the distance with Saturn in the foreground, Saturn eclipsing the sun, otherwise we wouldn't be able to look at the Earth. And long story short, we found the time to take the picture. It was July 19th, 2013. And I thought, as I was doing this years ago, I thought, my goodness, why don't we, instead of telling people after the fact, after the picture's taken, showing it to them and say, hey, world, we took your picture 2 months ago or a week ago, why don't we tell them ahead of time that we're going to take your picture on such and such a date, such and such a time, and at the time the picture is going to be taken, go out. Think about this. Think about the incredible achievement that this interplanetary salute between robot and maker represents, and think about our planet, how unique it is, its life-giving beauty and its utter isolation and the blackness of space, and think about life on planet Earth and marvel at your own existence while this picture is being taken. Oh, and by the way, look up and smile. And so people did that. We sent out the word, and people all over the globe did it. I've posted some of their responses on a website that I set up for this. It's called thedaytheearthsmiled.com. And it was glorious. People really got into it. I wanted people to feel the cosmic love, and that's what they did. And we took this beautiful picture with Saturn and Earth in the distance, and now when everybody looks at that picture, they can know that's the day the Earth was smiling back. So we did it a year ago, and the anniversary will be July 19, coming up.
There's some Sagan we're channeling, isn't it? I mean, when he did Pale Blue Dot, was referring to, when you see us in context of the rest of the solar system, of the galaxy, of the universe, We're not different factions. We're not different nations. We're humankind. And we're squabbling over the most ridiculous of stuff. When if we perhaps had some perspective, we could really be addressing real world problems and overcoming and perhaps accomplishing amazing things together if we would simply look past our petty differences. I was introduced to Carl Sagan, genuinely introduced after he'd already passed away. And I often find myself wondering, will there ever be another? I mean, the man was just a poet. Do you want to give me your impressions of Carl Sagan?
Well, first, let me say something. I want to address something you said, and that's about perspective. I think that is the greatest legacy and also the greatest gift that our planetary explorations have bequeathed to us. You know, this uncorrupted view of ourselves, the way we really are, where we really are, and the circumstance in which we really are. And that is what we've learned, if nothing else. And that, I think, is, of course, what Carl was romancing when he talked about the pale blue dot. There will never be another Carl Sagan, and maybe there should not be. You know, the world changes and the world needs different things. But I feel what will be always universal is that we appreciate the message that is conveyed by these pictures that show us as nothing but a small little rock adrift in space. That is where we are now. We will make our stand there until the sun blows up and fries us. And you know, let's make the best of it.
I say this often about the free thought movement. We've got a great story, but we're not always great at telling it. I find the same is often true of space exploration. We have a great story. Unfortunately, from time to time, it is often told from the perspective of technicians rather than, you know, technician, scientist, poets like Sagan and some others out there.
I'm not going to be so critical of us. What I think the problem is that we have a great story. We're really using whatever resources we have to tell it, but we are so being drowned out by all the other stories that are being said more frequently, louder, with a lot more financial support, with a lot more distribution. I think that's the issue. There's so many messages out there that ours is getting lost.
Do you watch science fiction films and see them from the perspective of a technician and go, that's not right? Did you go see Gravity with George Clooney and Sandra Bullock and go, that's not right, that's incorrect? Are you that person, Dr. Porco?
Okay, I will say I'm not a person who watches sci-fi because I've got something better, and that is the real thing. Okay, but I did watch Gravity because, you know, it's about the business that I associated with, and I wanted to see it anyway, and I knew it would be tremendous cinematography, and it was. But of course I saw things that were wrong. There were lots of things wrong. But I've come to kind of expect that. Even consider this. Everybody should consider this. Just for us to be able to show you a picture of Saturn, right? So that you don't have to turn the lights out and, you know, get a blanket over your head and over your computer monitor, and that you could actually see it. We have to violate truth. Because, you know, at Saturn, if you were there at Saturn, the sunlight is 1/100th of what it is here. It would look very, very faint. So, you know, to tell a story, sometimes you have to violate the truth. You know, if people really want to know what the truth is, they should become a scientist.
Well, I'm not trying to be the spoil sport. I will say, because I enjoyed Gravity, and I get roasted for that, but I enjoyed myself very much. But at the beginning, when George Clooney's got his little jetpack on and he's zooming all around this multi-billion-dollar satellite assembly as if it's nothing, I'm like, there's no way they would let him tool around like he's on a scooter when he's so close to expensive technology. I'm sure it's much more conservative up there at that level.
Well, I noted things like the way they went from one vehicle to another. You know, that's not the way it would work. The orbits don't work like that. And then also, you know, when they go crashing into the space station, nothing happens to them. I mean, you know, there were some physical principles that were violated.
Is there a film that comes to mind that got it right more than another? I mean, is there one where you thought, hey, their consulting team on this must have been pretty together? I don't want to put you on the spot,
yes.
but...
Yes, of course I know the answer to that. And it's my favorite movie. It was 2001: A Space Odyssey. Kubrick nearly went broke making that accurate. He spent a lot of time. He interviewed companies like Pan Am, Howard Johnson, to make sure that he could depict, he asked them, what do you envision your products and your company doing in 2001? And he spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get things right. In fact, in the book, the monolith is put on the Saturnian moon Iapetus. The book 2001, Clark put it on Iapetus, but because Kubrick could not figure out how to render the rings of Saturn, he instead bagged going to Saturn, and he went to Jupiter instead because he didn't have to deal with the rings. So he was very, very into being accurate, and he did a beautiful job, and as far as I'm concerned, that movie set the bar for science fiction. And I like also about that movie, as long as you get me started on it, I'm going to continue.
Take your time. I'm enjoying this. Go ahead.
What I like about it is that it was a movie. This is often given as one of the criticisms of the movie. It happens to be what I liked about it. It gave the viewer time to think. It wasn't just a big kind of blockbuster movie that we have today with this action, just everything is so fast, it's hard to absorb it all. There was lots of time to think, to enjoy the cinematography, to revel in back then, its novelty. And it was all about human evolution. That movie was about human evolution, and it was great to just sit and dwell on it all. I must have gone to that movie about 12 times, and now I own it. I mean, I've owned it for a long time now. So, it to me set the bar for how a movie, at least of its ilk, should be made.
It's the kind of film that not only did you sit through the end credits and try to digest what you'd just seen and then talk about it with your friends, but you talked about it again over dinner and then the next day at lunch and then a month later. And, it's been decades and decades, and people are still chewing on this film, its imagery, its symbolism, and that's a testament to Kubrick's genius. What an amazing film. It wasn't just bubblegum for the brain and g'day, I'm out of here. It's the kind of thing that just really gets into your bones. Fantastic stuff.
Because it was about human evolution. I don't think any other movie ever dealt with such a heavy topic. It was fascinating.
And the special effects have held up well, which most 60s sci-fi, woo,
Right.
I mean,
right, like colanders for helmets or something.
Yeah, everybody's got tinfoil on, and they're walking around with these big snow boots and whatnot. And it was so far ahead of its time. As long as we're talking about film, you were a character consultant on the film Contact, and your role was what?
I was brought on to help develop the on-screen character of Ellie Arroway. And in fact, Carl invited me. I'll never forget this. He called me up and said, out of all the female scientists he knew, I came closest to being like the character they wanted to portray in the film. And so I went out to Hollywood and sat in a think tank session, is how I would refer to this, with Carl, his wife Ann Druyan, the executive producer who was Linda Obst, and the then director George Miller. They changed out directors after a while, but and we just sat and talked about Ellie Arroway and how she should be depicted and what kind of experiences she should have. And if such and such happened to you, Carolyn, how would you feel? How would you react? They're trying to lend authenticity to this portrayal that they were going to put on the screen. And so that was the role I played. I was supposed to actually meet with Jodie Foster. There were several attempts to try to get Jodie and myself together so she could kind of, shadow me for a day or two, get the feel for what a female scientist does. That never came to pass, believe it or not, because schedules couldn't be arranged. But in the end, she did a fabulous job, and I was told that she used Carl as her role model. So it turned out great. I loved that movie. I think she did a fabulous job.
And then involved in 2009's sort of reboot of Star Trek, directed by J.J. Abrams. Now, I was a little skeptical, right? Because I was weaned on classic Trek. Kirk, Spock, and Scotty and the gang, that's kind of my scene. The styrofoam rocks and the, all that stuff. I love classic Trek, even today. And when they said they were going to reboot it, my heart sank. I thought, oh my God, it's going to be vanilla. It's going to be just a high budget piece of nothing. And I thought they pulled it off. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the film, and how are you involved? I'm curious.
Well, I was brought on, I thought actually to be a consultant on planetary imagery. I thought there were going to be a lot of sessions about, we want to have this scene take place here. What would this planetary environment look like? But instead, I met J.J. Abrams at TED. He's heard my TED Talk. He's been on my distribution list for Cassini Discoveries. And about 9 months after my first TED Talk, I get a call from him, and he said, I heard your talk, I've been getting your emails, and, I really feel I should reach out to you, involve you in this film. And believe it or not, it was conversing with him about 2001 and how 2001 was absolutely the pinnacle that convinced me I wanted to work with him. So I said, what I really would like to do, aside from consulting on this, I'd love to see a scene being filmed. So I ended up seeing the scene where the young Kirk gets the crap kicked out of him in a bar. Okay? It wasn't really the scene I wanted to see, but I saw it, and I have to tell you, it convinced me that being a Hollywood movie star would not be a good job. But anyway, put that aside for the moment.
Wait, why not? Why not? Was it just, did they do like...
Well, I saw Chris Pine get punched in the face, fall on the floor, get picked up, punched again, ricocheted off a wall, fall on a table, fall on the floor 26 times.
Yeah, that'll do it.
I wouldn't want to be Chris Pine in making a scene like that. That's what I thought. Anyway, so we break for lunch, and I'm sitting around. By the way, Hollywood is not glamorous. We're like sitting, this is cafeteria style, metal tables, metal serving trays. Everyone's in line grabbing their stuff. I sit with J.J. Abrams and the guy who's the head of special effects. His name was Roger Guyette. And we're just having lunch, chatting, and then J.J. says to me, okay, well, I need your help. We have a problem. The Enterprise is going to come back into the solar system to save the Earth, and we have to figure out where to hide it. So I'm a little surprised by this question, and I'm thinking, well, it's a little bit silly, but maybe he's just trying to see if I could come up with a good idea, and if I come up with good ideas, there'll be more of this. So I immediately say, oh, well, why don't you have it come out of warp drive in the atmosphere of Titan, and then have it rise through the atmosphere, the hazy atmosphere of Titan, above the haze, and you can watch it come out of the atmosphere, and with Saturn and the rings in the background, it'll be spectacular. And he says to me, oh my God, that's brilliant. And he used that. That's a scene in the movie, and that's all he ever asked of me. So
I know the scene. I mean, I know the scene you're talking about. That was you? I want your autograph.
That was my idea.
Wow.
And they sent me drafts of it as they were making it, and I pointed out the things that were wrong. They did not want to correct the things that were wrong. So like I was telling you before, there's things that are wrong, but it tells a story, so what the heck. And I have to say, I never got a cent for that, and he liked it so much he used that same idea again in the second Star Trek, so it must have been a good idea. But
wow.
I did get a credit, which was in Hollywood, actually, means a lot. So that was good. But about the movie, I loved it. And I know that it doesn't have the intellectual heft that the Star Trek of the 1960s had. It doesn't go into any big societal problems. It's not painting a well, it kind of paints a utopian vision, but there's not a whole lot of intellectual musings about anything. But the way the characters really tracked their original characters, the 1960s characters, I thought was fabulous, and I really enjoyed the film, and I was happy to be involved in it.
In the 60s, the original Trek was dealing with so many social issues of the time, sexism and racism and all of these other things, and those exist, of course, today, but they came in many ways to fever pitch back in 1966, 7, and 8. And Roddenberry used the sci-fi backdrop. He used this fictional backdrop in order to address many real-world issues. Again, speaking to being able to use the bigger picture of space, of how we should see ourselves in perspectives to sort of address the human condition. It was really brilliant stuff and groundbreaking for its time, yes?
It was. And as I understand it, the first interracial kiss on TV was in Star Trek. So, it was great, and it was great to grow up with those messages. I'm very happy I'm a child of the 60s. I know baby boomers get tiresome in their glorification of the 1960s, but we have good reason to.
Back to J.J. Abrams, I'll get off the movies in a second, but this fascinates me. And He's taken over the Star Wars franchise. Is there a Star Wars, Star Trek sort of a tug of war with you, or is it all Trek? Do you care at all about the Jedi Order and all of that?
Oh, I loved Star Wars too. So it's okay. It's all good with me. JJ is really a Star Wars guy. That's really where he belongs. So I think it's going to be good.
I had an email in from Deborah who said, "Did you ever wish to be an astronaut? Would you ever want to travel into space yourself?"
Well, if it were made easy, like really easy, maybe I would. But you see, Deborah, I am tremendously susceptible to motion sickness, and I think it would end up a mess. So I really feel, and I do really feel, that I've gotten my jollies from being a planetary explorer and coming into work and seeing pictures of Saturn. And when I was on the Voyager project, flying by Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, I mean, that was tremendous. And it's all I'll ever get, but I'm content. I'm really thrilled about it.
I had a message from Chris and said, "How would you describe the atmosphere at NASA in regard to religion? Does the topic come up in casual conversation? And if so, are atheists and or non-believers respected in that community?"
The topic of religion never comes up at NASA. It's none of NASA's business. Why would they even begin to talk about that? And, I don't know. I mean, it never comes up. I couldn't tell you my scientific colleagues who's an atheist, who's a rabid religious person. I don't know.
Everybody's just doing their job, taking care of business kind of thing, huh?
We're doing our job, taking care of business, and I have to say, digging it like crazy. So no one's going to be throwing axes about whether or not you believe in this or that.
Dr. Porco, do you have a dog in that fight? I mean, you attended and spoke at the Imagine No Religion conference. Do you have a sort of a perspective on religion, on non-belief, on any of that?
I feel that people are religious. I feel that religion still exists because it's basically a deeply entrenched cultural phenomenon. Okay? I think most people who are really deeply religious don't think, they're not wondering and musing about the subtleties of the ideology of religion. People like myself and other scientists, we are paid to stay up late at night thinking, about what this idea means, what are the ramifications of it, what if we change it slightly, how then do the conclusions change? I mean, we're trained to think like that. But the layperson isn't, and I don't think that belief in God, people, believe in God because they sat down and they thought that it makes the most sense. I think they belong to religious organizations because their parents did, or their family forever has been religious, and they grew up in that. It's like, I'm of Italian descent. I grew up eating spaghetti. Someone who's Jewish grew up eating matzah. It's as cultural as that. And so I think, actually, this is quite hopeful, because I think that the smaller the Earth gets, the smaller the world gets with the Internet and instant communications and people being able to have relationships of sorts with people on the other side of the world, will ultimately change this. I think that the world is going more, on average, you can, of course, identify certain locales where this is decidedly not the case, but I think on average the world is going to be tilting more and more towards non-belief. It's just going to take time. Think about how entrenched the feeling of being French is for a French person, or being English is for an English person. Maybe even eventually those kind of differences will disappear and people will see each other as, just a fellow human being. I'm hoping that that's really where we're headed. And if that ever happens, I think it's not out of the question we could see religion and belief in God disappear. Of course, we also have to ensure that we have to work out these inequalities that I mentioned earlier, because when people are really, really destitute, poor, and they're very, very miserable, their lives are nothing but misery, it comforts them to believe that something better is out there for them.
One of my favorite quotes from Robert Greene Ingersoll is, "The more false we destroy, the more room we make for the true." And I know when you have superstitious belief often informing science, people are getting their science from pastors instead of from actual scientists. it sort of plays into a challenge, which we certainly see here in the United States. Did you have a commentary or perspective on science education here, and what do you think?
It goes back to what I said about, NASA's message or the scientist's message. There are so many other messages that are being broadcast more loudly, more widely, with more resources. And that's the battle we're up against. There's not enough of us. And also, I hate to say this for the way it sounds, but we tend to be more reasonable. People who are more reasonable oftentimes don't do well when battling against people who have no trouble being unreasonable. So, we have specific challenges.
I know Cosmos has been educating people about space and space exploration and that type of thing. Of course, Carl Sagan's version in 1980 and the new one with Neil deGrasse Tyson. So I have to ask, I'm sure many have you seen the new one, and what do you think?
I've seen most of the episodes. I think I've missed a few because I couldn't be in front of the television at the right time. But I'm very, very happy with it. I mean, there are things I could quibble with, but I think overall it's hit the mark. I could see people have really enjoyed it. It was a brilliant move to bring it to Fox, where the audience is different and more in need of it than any other audience you could think of. And it's been so popular, they're even considering doing another one now, as I understand it. So it's been glorious. It's a great way to tune people in and turn them on to the beauty of science and the benefits of scientific inquiry and the power of knowledge. Knowledge is powerful, and people should not shun it. They should not be afraid of it. They should embrace it. And that's what Cosmos is helping people do. You've been very generous with your time. One last question, if I may. Let's say there is a young Carolyn Porco listening in the audience, and I have a lot of young people who listen to this show, and they, that spark is really beginning to ignite inside of them. And, I just kind of like you to speak to them about, an encouragement to remain curious, to discover the world, to maybe give them a window into what has made you so passionate about this over all these years. Do you want to speak to that for just a second? I absolutely would. I think, for me, that being a scientist and being a planetary explorer has been the most meaningful calling I could have followed. And I know that, when comes time for me to bid this world goodbye, I know that I will have spent my life doing absolutely the best thing anybody could have done, and that I was able to extend my reach across the solar system because of the career that I chose. It is a tremendously uplifting and exalting feeling, and there's nothing like making your own scientific discovery. It's like finding out a secret of nature that nobody else knew before, and when you're the one who makes the discovery, that period of time before you get to telling anybody about it and you're the only one on the planet who knows it, there is nothing like it. It is so phenomenal that you want to go back. You want it again. It's like a fix that you have to have. So I can't really think of another career that offers that kind of feeling, the feeling that you really have done something so fundamentally important that you got to sign your name to the great declaration of human thought by being a scientist. So don't worry about how difficult it is. Accept how difficult it is, and you will be amply rewarded for the rest of your life. We have accomplished so much. I mean, we're not to pat ourselves on the back. Obviously, the more we discover, the more we learn we have yet to discover. But to see the leaps forward that humankind has taken in the last few decades, what an amazing time to be alive. Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. There were times when it didn't look like this. There were times when scientists and the pursuit of knowledge were persecuted. And there are still places, of course, around the globe where that is happening. But on average, overall, we're headed in the right direction, and we have learned so much. And that's the message set that we have to, we have to be as loud as the next guy in letting everybody know that. So I applaud you for a show like this in trying to get the message out, which is why I was happy to be here. Well, it was an honor to have you on. You're a great guest. I wish you'd just sort of come back every week and we'll just chat. We'll talk Star Trek. It'll be awesome. Okay. Dr. Carolyn Porco, by the way, I will include links to The Day the Earth Smiled and the Cyclops.org website so that you can go and check out the photographs, all the stuff that has been posted, and you can sort of participate in these amazing discoveries. I'm also on Twitter. Carolyn Porco, @Carolyn Porco, and it's the same thing on Facebook.
Fantastic. For being such a good guest, for chewing out an hour of your busy schedule to be here tonight, and just for the great work you do. Thank you so much, Dr. Porco. It's been a real joy.
Oh, thanks for having me, Seth. It's been a pleasure.
Tonight's broadcast has been brought to you by naturebox.com, where you can order great tasting healthy snacks and get 50% off. Forget the vending machine, get in shape with healthy, delicious treats like PB&J, granola, and a whole lot more. Support this show, get half off your first order. Go to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. That's naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.